A woman stands knee-deep in Lake Texcoco at midnight. Her white dress is soaked. Her black hair covers her face. She raises both arms toward the city and screams in a language the Spanish will soon forbid. "Oh, my children, we are about to go forever." The Aztec priests record this. They have been recording her for 10 years. Same woman, same lake, same scream. They know what it means. When Cihuacōātl appears, nations die. 3 months later, Hernán Cortés lands on the coast. Within 3 years, 24,000 bodies fill the canals where she stood. This is not La Llorona, the guilty mother searching for children she murdered. That legend was written by Franciscan missionaries in the 1530s to replace what she actually was. They could not erase her from memory, so they transformed her instead. Kept the white dress, the black hair, the water's edge, the screaming. Changed only what it meant. The goddess became a ghost story. The prophecy became punishment. The warning became guilt. This is the Pandora's Project. Tonight we unseal how the Spanish Empire rewrote an Aztec goddess into a cautionary tale designed to control indigenous women. The missionary records that document the transformation. The court cases that show the real tragedies behind the legend. The modern sightings that prove something still appears at the water's edge. Subscribe if you refuse to accept sanitized mythology as truth. Like if you want to see how empires rewrite cultures by transforming their gods. Comment with which version of La Llorona shaped your understanding and what you now realize was stolen. The goddess screamed warnings. The conquistadors made her scream in shame. Part 1. The goddess before the conquest. Before there was La Llorona, before the Spanish arrived with their crosses and their new names for old gods, there was Cihuacōātl. The Aztec codices preserved after the conquest describe her as the serpent woman, the goddess of motherhood, childbirth, and midwives. They describe women who died bringing life into the world, and what happened to them after death. The transformation. The passage into Cihuacōātl, warrior goddesses who accompanied the sun across the sky. Fierce, powerful, divine. But Cihuacōātl herself was something different. The records from the final years before conquest describe how she appeared in Tenochtitlan at night. Witnesses reported hearing her screaming through the streets, a sound like no human voice should make. She wore white. Her hair hung long and black. She wept as she screamed, and her voice carried across the entire city. When Cihuacōātl screamed through the capital, the priests knew. Death was coming. Not personal death. Collective death. The death of nations. In the 10 years before Hernán Cortés landed on the coast of Mexico in 1519, she appeared repeatedly. The priests recorded each sighting in their chronicles. Each time, she cried the same words in Nahuatl, later translated by Spanish scribes who found the records disturbing enough to preserve. "Oh, my children, we are about to go forever." Within 3 years of her final recorded appearance, Tenochtitlan fell. The temples burned. The priests were executed or forced to convert. The goddess Cihuacōātl was forbidden. Her worship became punishable by death. The Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sahagún arrived in Mexico in 1529, 8 years after the fall. He spent the next 50 years documenting what remained of Aztec culture, creating what would become known as the Florentine Codex. His mandate from the church was clear: record what they believed, then help eliminate it. Sahagún interviewed elderly Aztecs who remembered seeing the goddess before the conquest. One witness, interviewed in the 1540s, described seeing Cihuacōātl at Lake Texcoco 3 months before the Spanish arrived. The goddess stood at the water's edge, knee-deep in the lake, her white dress soaked and heavy. She faced toward the city. Her arms were raised. She was screaming. The sound made every dog in the city howl and every bird take flight. The witness said the goddess's face was covered by her hair, but her voice came from everywhere at once. She was calling for her children. She knew they were about to be taken from her. Sahagún wrote this testimony in Nahuatl first, then translated it to Spanish. He preserved it. He also added a note for his church superiors. This native belief must be suppressed. The Catholic Church faced a problem. They could not allow Cihuacōātl to continue existing as a goddess, but they could not make the people forget her. She had been seen too often, by too many witnesses, in too many places. Her screaming was part of living memory for thousands of indigenous people who survived the conquest. The solution was transformation. The Spanish took every detail that made her recognizable. White dress, long black hair, position at the water's edge, screaming voice calling for children. They kept it all. Then they gave her a new story, one that served their purposes instead of preserving Aztec memory. Part 2. The Colonizer's Rewrite. August 1521. Tenochtitlan burns. Hernán Cortés stands at the temple steps and watches priests throw codices into the flames. Smoke rises from 200 feet of carved stone soaked in blood and fire. 3 months later, the killing stops. The conquistadors count their new subjects. Maybe 24,000 dead. Maybe more. The canals are filled with bodies. The survivors have no food, no clean water, no temples, no priests. The gods are forbidden now. A Franciscan friar named Bernardino de Sahagún arrives in 1529. He is 30 years old. He has orders from the church. Document what the natives believe, then eliminate it. Sahagún finds elderly Aztecs who remember the goddess. He records their testimony in the language they speak, Nahuatl, then translates it into Spanish. One witness describes seeing her at Lake Texcoco 3 months before Cortés landed. White dress, long hair, knee-deep in water, arms raised, screaming. The sound made every dog howl. Every bird took flight. Sahagún writes it down. Then he adds a note for his superiors. This belief must be suppressed. The challenge is immense. You can execute priests who refuse to convert. You can burn codices. You can demolish temples and build churches on the rubble. But you cannot make millions of people forget a goddess they have seen with their own eyes. The missionaries try suppression first. Indigenous religious practices become punishable by torture and death. A woman caught leaving offerings at the lakeshore is brought before the priest. He asks why she disobeys. She says the goddess appeared to her mother, her grandmother, her great-grandmother, for as long as anyone remembers. The priest orders 20 lashes. 2 weeks later, different woman, same lakeshore, same offerings. The missionaries realize suppression will not work, so they change strategy. In documents from the 1530s, a new approach appears. Keep the imagery. Change the meaning. The instructions are specific. The native people will not abandon the woman in white. They have seen her too many times, so let them keep her, but transform what she represents. Make her human, not divine. Make her guilty, not prophetic. Make her punishment, not transformation. A priest writes to his superiors. The natives cling to their screaming woman at the water. We will give them a screaming woman at the water, but she will teach what we need them to learn. The transformation is methodical. Same white dress, same long black hair, same position where land meets water, same voice calling for children. But now the children are dead, and she killed them. The church creates a story. A woman murdered her own children, drowned them in the river. Now she searches for them eternally, suffering for her unnatural sin. By the 1540s, missionaries stop writing Cihuacōātl in their reports. They write La Mujer que Llora, the woman who cries. The name shift is deliberate. Cihuacōātl is a goddess's name, with power embedded in the syllables. La mujer que llora is a description, a category. Anonymous. Powerless. Guilty. An indigenous woman in her 60s tells Sahagún she saw the goddess before the conquest. She remembers the white dress, the screaming, the prophecy. Sahagún records her testimony. Then he adds his own interpretation. This was not prophecy. This was native superstition. The woman's sin has become their haunting. The Catholic framework settles over Aztec memory like a burial shroud. The divine feminine becomes the monstrous feminine. The prophet becomes the murderer. The warning becomes the punishment. But the Church faces a new problem. The basic framework creates room for variation. White dress, dead children, water's edge, screaming. Why did she kill them? The Church provided no single answer, so indigenous communities began creating their own. Three main stories emerge, each one rooted in actual colonial trauma, each one documented in Spanish court records, each one reflecting how conquest destroys in different ways. Part 3. The Drowned Children. The first variant appears in a court document from 1567, Valley of Mexico, 20 miles from the ruins of Tenochtitlan. An indigenous woman stands before a Spanish magistrate. Her hands are bound. The charges? Infanticide. 2 children, both drowned in the river. The testimony proceeds. A conquistador's son had promised to marry her. She bore his children. He abandoned her to marry a Spanish woman from Sevilla. The magistrate asks why she killed them. Her answer is recorded in Spanish. Because he took everything from me. The children were all I had left of what he promised. The magistrate sentences her to death. She is executed the following week. The case record notes that before her execution, she confessed and accepted Catholic salvation. 30 years later, that case has become a story. The details shift. Sometimes a soldier, sometimes a nobleman. Sometimes 2 children, sometimes 3. But the structure remains. Indigenous woman, Spanish man, betrayal, drowning, punishment. This version spreads across regions where conquistadors took indigenous partners and left them, which is everywhere the Spanish went. The second variant appears in court documents from 1612. Central Mexico. A wealthy Spanish couple. The husband is accused of adultery. His wife discovers he has children with another woman. She does not confront him. She waits until he leaves for business in another province. Then she takes their own children to the river. A witness reports seeing her at the water's edge at midnight. The children were already dead. She walked into the river fully clothed. She did not surface. Her body is recovered 3 days later. The children's bodies are found a week after that, caught in reeds downstream. The husband returns. He finds his house empty, his family destroyed. Records show he entered a monastery shortly after. The land and wealth were seized by the church. This case becomes a different story. A woman consumed by jealousy. A woman who destroyed her own children to punish her husband. Maternal love twisted into weapon against paternal authority. This version spreads in wealthy urban areas where Spanish families maintain appearances while conducting affairs. The third variant appears in multiple court records from rural regions throughout the late 16th and early 17th centuries. The pattern repeats. Famine, poverty, accusations of infanticide. 1598. A woman in Oaxaca is brought before the magistrate. Her 3 children drowned in the local stream. She claims they fell. Witnesses say she held them under. She is convicted. She hangs. 1605. A woman in Puebla. 2 children drowned. She confesses she could not feed them. She watched them starve for weeks. She says drowning was faster. She is executed. 1619. A woman in Michoacán. 4 children drowned. She says she heard voices telling her they would be better off dead than living as slaves on the encomienda. The court declares her mad. She is executed anyway. These cases share common factors: extreme poverty created by colonial labor systems, indigenous families displaced from their land, children dying slowly of hunger, mothers accused of mercy killings. The Spanish records treat each case as individual criminal depravity. They do not connect the cases to colonial policies that created the conditions. They do not mention that indigenous child mortality increased dramatically under Spanish rule. They do not note that traditional agricultural systems were destroyed and replaced with cash crops for export. They simply record: woman drowned children, woman executed. This version spreads in impoverished rural communities where colonial exploitation is most brutal. By the mid-17th century, the 3 variants have geographic distribution patterns. Coastal and border regions tell the conquistador story. Urban centers tell the jealousy story. Rural agricultural areas tell the poverty story. But all 3 keep the same elements: white dress, long black hair, water, screaming, searching, never finding, never resting. In 1680, a Franciscan friar in New Mexico writes to his superiors in Mexico City. The natives here tell stories about a woman who drowned her children and now haunts the rivers. I have used this legend to teach them about sin and damnation. It is most effective. The goddess has been successfully transformed. Cihuacōātl, who appeared as prophecy, who represented transformation between life and death, who warned that her children would be taken forever. She is now La Llorona, the guilty mother, the eternal punishment. The cautionary tale. The transformation serves every colonial purpose. It erases indigenous divine feminine power. It reinforces Catholic guilt. It warns women against resistance, rage, or desperation. It provides a visceral image of eternal damnation. It ignores the colonial violence that creates the actual tragedies. And it works. By the 18th century, La Llorona is the story parents tell children to keep them away from dangerous water at night. The Aztec goddess is forgotten. The colonial ghost story is what everyone remembers. Except the details that make no sense keep appearing. Why does she always stand where water meets land? Why does her voice sound wrong? Why does seeing her predict death? Why does she appear before dawn? These details fit a goddess associated with liminal spaces in prophecy. They do not fit a guilty ghost searching for dead children. In 1821, Mexico gains independence from Spain. The colonial period ends. The Spanish leave. The churches remain. The legend remains. And then something unexpected happens. People start seeing her again. Not as legend, as presence. Part 4. The Eternal Search. The 20th century brought something unexpected. After 400 years of being primarily a folktale told by parents to keep children away from rivers and lakes at night, La Llorona began appearing in documented witness accounts again. Real reports, filed with police, investigated by authorities who found nothing but could not explain what the witnesses had seen. Modern sightings cluster around specific types of locations: rivers, lakes, irrigation canals, and bridges in areas with significant Mexican and Mexican-American populations: the Rio Grande, the San Antonio River, Lake Texcoco in Mexico City. Irrigation channels throughout the agricultural regions of the southwestern United States. The descriptions remain remarkably consistent across decades and distances. A woman in a white dress, long black hair obscuring her face, standing at or near water. Always at night, most often between midnight and 4 o'clock in the morning. A voice calling children's names or crying. The figure either vanishes when approached or transforms into mist or shadow. Police reports from border regions between the United States and Mexico contain multiple accounts from officers who responded to calls about a woman in distress near water, only to find no one there when they arrived. Security personnel at construction sites near rivers describe seeing a woman in white walking along the water's edge where no one should be able to access. They call it in. They investigate. They find wet footprints that lead to the water and stop. Night shift workers in agricultural areas report hearing a woman crying or calling out near irrigation channels. When they go to investigate, they find the footprints. Always the same pattern, leading to the water, then nothing. Drivers on rural roads near water describe seeing a woman in white standing on the shoulder or in the middle of the road. When they stop or swerve, the figure vanishes. Some report that when they look in their rearview mirror, the woman is standing directly behind their vehicle, close enough to touch the glass. These modern accounts cluster in regions with high populations of people of Mexican descent, suggesting the legend maintains strongest presence in communities with direct cultural connection to colonial Mexico. But the question remains, are they seeing a legend, or are they seeing what the Aztecs saw before the legend existed? Skeptics point out that mass suggestion, cultural conditioning, and the power of expectation could explain most sightings. If you grow up hearing stories about La Llorona, and you see a woman in white near water at night, your mind will interpret that image through the framework of the legend you already know. This explanation has merit, but it does not explain why the sightings consistently describe details that witnesses often do not realize are significant. Multiple modern accounts describe the woman's clothing as appearing soaked, heavy with water, even when witnesses see her standing on dry land away from the water's edge. This detail appears in reports from people who have no knowledge of the Aztec origin story, where Cihuacōātl was described as standing knee-deep in Lake Texcoco. They should not know this detail, yet they report it anyway. Other accounts describe an unnatural quality to the figure's voice, reporting that it seems to come from multiple directions simultaneously or sounds wrong in ways difficult to articulate. Again, this detail matches the pre-conquest descriptions of Cihuacōātl's screaming that seem to come from everywhere at once. Witnesses who have never heard of Cihuacōātl describe the voice the same way Aztec priests described it in 1511. Some witnesses report that seeing the figure is accompanied by sudden temperature drops, animals acting disturbed, or a feeling of overwhelming grief or dread that has no apparent source. Dogs howl. Birds scatter. The air changes. These details suggest that the encounters involve something beyond simple misidentification of ordinary women. The academic and psychological explanations for La Llorona's persistence focus on cultural memory and the legend's function in processing historical trauma. Researchers point out that the story encodes centuries of colonial violence against indigenous women, including sexual exploitation, economic oppression, forced conversion, and systematic erasure of cultural identity. The weeping woman searching for her lost children can be interpreted as a metaphor for indigenous communities searching for cultural identities that were stolen, suppressed, or destroyed. This interpretation has significant support. Mexican and Mexican-American communities have used La Llorona as a cultural touchstone, a shared story that maintains connection to history and identity across generations. The legend persists because it serves important cultural functions beyond simple ghost story entertainment. But this explanation, while valid, assumes the modern sightings are entirely psychological or cultural rather than connected to anything objectively present in the locations where the figure appears. It assumes the witnesses are seeing cultural memory, not the thing that created the memory. Another interpretation considers the possibility that the modern sightings represent continuation of whatever the pre-conquest Aztecs were witnessing when they reported seeing Cihuacōātl. If the Aztec accounts of the screaming goddess were based on actual encounters with something present in those locations, and if that something is still present in those locations, then the modern sightings might be encounters with the same phenomenon, interpreted through the framework of the La Llorona legend instead of the Cihuacōātl mythology. This interpretation requires accepting that the pre-conquest sightings were not simply myth or mass hysteria, but responses to something that multiple witnesses across decades genuinely encountered. The Aztec chronicles describing Cihuacōātl's appearances are remarkably detailed and consistent, suggesting eyewitness accounts rather than invented mythology. If Cihuacōātl was a real phenomenon, whether understood as goddess, spirit, or something else entirely, then La Llorona might be the same phenomenon continuing to manifest in locations associated with water and death, now interpreted through a Catholic colonial framework instead of an Aztec religious one. The appearance stayed the same. Only the explanation changed. The legend's geographic distribution supports this possibility. La Llorona sightings concentrate in regions that were part of the Aztec Empire or were colonized by Spanish forces that conquered Aztec territories. The legend is strongest in areas where both the indigenous memory and the colonial trauma are deepest. What remains consistent across 5 centuries is the imagery: white dress, long black hair, water's edge, screaming or crying, calling for children, appearing as omen or warning, vanishing when approached. These details persist whether the figure is called Cihuacōātl, La Llorona, or simply the woman in white. The interpretation changes. The colonial origin stories provide different explanations. The cultural meaning shifts, but the figure itself remains consistent. The white dress never changes color. The position at the water's edge never moves inland. The voice never sounds human. The modern accounts suggest that whatever the Aztecs witnessed in Tenochtitlan before the conquest, people are still witnessing in Mexico City and along the Rio Grande today. The Spanish changed the story. They could not change what appears. For communities of Mexican and Mexican-American descent, La Llorona serves multiple functions simultaneously. She is a cautionary tale told to children. She is a symbol of cultural identity and historical trauma. She is a ghost story that continues to generate new sightings and accounts. She is a connection to indigenous ancestry that survived colonial attempts at erasure. The legend persists because it serves all these functions at once, operating on multiple levels that reinforce each other. But underneath the colonial ghost story, underneath the cautionary tale about drowned children and guilty mothers, the goddess is still visible. Cihuacōātl still stands at the water's edge, screaming warnings that most people no longer understand. The Spanish Empire is gone. The Aztec Empire is gone. The goddess and the ghost story remain. Final part: the breaking seals. The archive reveals how cultural erasure operates through mythology. The Spanish could not make the Aztec people forget Cihuacōātl. She had been seen too many times, by too many witnesses, in too many places. Her screaming had predicted the conquest itself. The memory was too strong to eliminate. So the conquistadors and missionaries transformed her instead. They kept every detail that made her recognizable and changed the meaning of those details to serve colonial control. The divine feminine became the monstrous feminine. The prophet goddess became the guilty ghost. The warning became a punishment. But transformation is never complete. The goddess remains visible inside the ghost story for those who know the original form. The woman in white still stands at the boundary between water and land, still appears at the threshold between night and dawn, still screams in a voice that does not sound human, still predicts death and transformation. These details make no sense if she is simply a guilty mother searching for her drowned children. They make perfect sense if she is what the Aztecs said she was: a goddess of liminal spaces, of transformation, of the moment between life and death. 500 years after the conquest, people still see her. The Spanish changed the story. They could not change what appears. Did you hear this legend as a child? Which version? The conquistador who abandoned his indigenous lover. The jealous wife who drowned her children for revenge. The starving mother driven mad by poverty. Or something closer to the goddess the Aztecs knew. How does knowing the real tragedies behind the ghost story change what you feel when you hear her name? If you stayed this far, you understand why these truths matter. Like this episode, if seeing how empires control populations by rewriting their myths resonates with you. Subscribe to the Pandora's Project so you are here when we unseal the next archive. Comment with which version of La Llorona shaped your childhood and what details you now recognize were changed from the original. Which truth disturbed you most? The goddess deliberately erased from history. The colonial trauma encoded in multiple ghost stories. The modern sightings that match pre-conquest descriptions. Or the realization that what the Aztecs witnessed in Tenochtitlan might still be present at the water's edge today. The screaming never stopped. Only the interpretation changed. See you in the next tomb.